Aloha and welcome to today's presentation, Ancient Oblivion, Monstrous Tribes, Real Monstrous Tribes, and Mutant Nations. Today we're going to be taking an in-depth look at these ancient, monstrous, or legendary tribes of humans that once walked the earth. Many of them, not just random anomalies or happenstance or one-offs, but actual times whenever the hold on, my phone is playing myself right now for some reason, my bad. We're going to look at the actual nations of mutants and how mutant human beings walked this earth, by the nation, by the tribe, by the hundreds and hundreds of them. And we're going to take a look at these things that have been swept under the rug as far as these the time when the mutants walked the earth, mutant human beings. We're also going to relate this to today, because what once was will be again. So with that said, let me go ahead and start up this slideshow. I'm going to put some images here behind me while I do this little introduction. The first thing we're going to do, let me just check my chat and make sure everything's good with everybody. Hey, what's up everybody in the chat? Welcome to today's presentation. Thank you for sticking around for the live stream. High fives to everybody. All right, thank you for the thumbs up. Kimberly F, I see you in the chat. All right, cool. Now, let me go ahead and we're going to do a quick little introduction as to, for example, some of the scholars, some of the academics, some of the explorers or across time and across the world who have met these creatures in person themselves or had secondhand accounts or had eyewitness reports of meeting such legendary tribes of mutant and mutated human beings. We're going to take a look at those, and we're also going to speculate as to what happened. How did so many human beings on Earth become all mutated with the same genetic defects at the same time? So here's a list of notable sources discussing monstrous races of men in antiquity, along with relevant quotes and the names of their writings. They're in no particular order. The first one's going to be Herodotus from the 5th century BC. In his book, The Histories, he writes about the legendary tribes of humanoid people, various ones, mentioning mythic races. And then we have Pliny the Elder, 1st century AD, who makes mention of the same legendary tribes of mutated human beings in his work Naturalis Historia, book number 7. Pomponius Mela in the 1st century AD also chronicles the existence of such legendary tribes of humans. Isidore of Seville, the 6th and 7th century AD, also writes of them in his book Etymology. Augustine of Hippo, 4th and 5th century AD, also talks about these strange mutant tribes of humanoid beings, the legendary tribes. Stasius of Cnidos writes about them in his book Indica. John Mandeville, who has a travelogue that we have broken down and decoded extensively here on my channel. We also have, other mentions. We talked about Herodotus, Pomponius Mela, Seville, Mandeville. We also have Ctesias of Cnidos, 4th century BC, Pliny the Elder, 1st century, Augustine of Hippo, Alexander the Great's campaigns. So it was mentioned and recorded that Alexander the Great met and fought against some of these legendary tribes of mutant humans. They're also featured on many medieval maps, as you'll see some of the pictures here. For example, these ones right here, they'll show you. They're depicted on these medieval maps. Almost all the time. There's some form of legendary tribes of humans. Not just maps either. Also, they're memorialized within the architecture of many medieval buildings as well. Renaissance cabinets of curiosities, integrated accounts of monstrous beings as a part of early attempts at cataloging natural history, as well as one of my favorite sources, medieval bestiaries. Okay, so those are just some of the relevant accounts. I'm also going to share with you this account, which comes from the creation epics from the Middle East regarding Enki and a female goddess named Ninma, sometimes known as Mami and other epithets as well. So this was the first creation of human beings according to this particular story. I'm just going to go ahead and start this slideshow over here. Now, Enki is challenging Ninma in the creation of humans, but when she first creates the humans, she makes genetic mutations. They're all mutated and they're all kind of messed up, and they have, things wrong with them. So, for example, it says, Ninma took clay from the top of the Abzu in her hand, and she fashioned it the first man who could not bend his outstretched, weak hands. Secondly, she fashioned one who turned back the light, a man with constantly opened eyes. And third, she fashioned one with both feet, which looked like they were broken, one with paralyzed feet. Fourth, she fashioned one who could not hold back his urine. Fifth, she fashioned a woman who could not give birth. Sixth, she fashioned one with neither penis nor vagina on its body. And so they took a look at that one. Ninma threw some clay on her hand, and Enki basically gave them all positions within his kingdom, right? And they were talking about the shapes of their heads and how to create these things. But basically, this is an account of the very first humans that were created. They were mutated. They were mutated human beings. These were humans, act just like you and me. They're mutants, though, right? Now, where we're going to begin this, you'll see examples of these on many maps, like I talked about, right? Here you can see one of the Blemmyes. Here's the Monopods or Sciapods. Here's the dog-headed tribe, etc., and so on and so forth. These are just, to get you to see that these are across cultures, right? This is, from the Far East and whatnots, right? These are Blemmyes, medieval times, and this is across the world, various cultures, not just, Europe, but this was in China and Japan. They have their own versions of all of these mutated tribes of humans. We're going to start with and focus on the Kappa, right? Most people would probably jump into Blemmyes or something a little more popular than that, right? But I'm going to discuss the Kappa, a lesser known of the mutated tribes of humans that once walked this world, okay? And remember, I'm not talking about it's just one instance or a one-off. I'm talking about entire communities, as they're often depicted whenever they're drawn, that people met up with these people and they had diplomatic relationships with them. So let's talk about the Kappa. You may or may not have heard of or seen the Kappa before. It kind of looks like some weird version of a turtle with part of its head that's cut off there. What it really is this is a monstrous creature that was a humanoid creature that was said to make its dwelling near bodies of water and rivers and lakes and things like that. And then it had sort of a flat head that had an indentation at the top. And that indentation, people saw that it carried water. And so sometimes the Kappa could be very respectful, especially if they met with a human that was respectful to them. They were known to, give a slight bow or nod, and to treat them well. But if they were not good people, then the Kappa oftentimes would attack them and drown them and pull them into the water. They were very emotional. Hey, somebody just gave a membership in the chat. Hold on, let me check on that. See what's going on here. Woundsocket, Truth Seeker, gifted 5 JayDreamerZ channel memberships. Congratulations and thank you to Woundsocket Truth Seeker. All right, cool. So the Kappa. So basically, the legend says that the Kappa was very strong, and that in order to sort of disorient the Kappa so that it wouldn't be aggressive or that it wouldn't attack or that it would lose its powers, that you had to spill this water that was on the top of its head. Okay? There's truth to all of these things. They've been cartoonified over time, as I'll show you. Now let's take a look at some other depictions of the Kappa so we can figure out what this actually is in real life, right? Here's a picture, here's a close-up you'll see of its eyes. Notice how they portray these eyes. And I'm using fiction. I'm using movie clips and drawings and, Renaissance paintings and stuff. But this is so that we can look at them collectively to see what they have in common. This is the root of comparative mythology. So you'll notice here the buggy eyes, the eyes that kind of almost protrude out of the face. Obviously, there's green colored skin as well, but you can look and see that it's got hair. right? And whenever they're depicted, I mean, this one is cartoonified. It's got the beak. It's clearly got a beak of like a bird or something there. Look at the skin. Look at the skin right here. This is very tiley, textured, hard, dense skin. And then they put the shell of a turtle behind it, right? Some cartoonified, some not. Here's the indentation on the head up here that carries the water. Now, this is one of my favorite depictions of a Kappa. I think this is a statue or a bust of one. And as you can see, sort of has like that Frankenstein-style head with the little indentation on the top that holds that water. And they say that if that water spills, then it would become docile, basically, right? It also has a protruding jaw, right? The upper part and lower part of the jaw are sticking out. This is a medical condition that exists within some humans, that sometimes they have more of a pronounced face down here, their mouth, their jaw sticks out, right? So let's take a closer look at this. You can see up at the top, there's something wrong with its skull. So let's suppose that this is a human being that was mutated, that changed, right? Or a whole bunch of them that were in a particular area, and they changed to look like this. The protruding jaw. We'll also see this whole protruding jaw thing with the dog-headed tribe, the dogmen, right? But let's take a look at the cranium, right? There is a medical condition called craniosynostosis. Craniosynostosis. And if we take a look at the head in people that have craniosynostosis, you'll also notice they also have some other features that are in common with the Kappa, which is the bulging eyes and protruding eyes that almost kind of stick out of the head. You can also see his mouth and jaw are sticking out a bit more as well, right? So here's another example. Now, I will say this, okay? I'm going to be discussing mutations and you know, actual real human mutations. There are ample pictures and videos on the internet that you can find. I will not be showing you all of them in their gory detail because we're not used to seeing those types of things, so they can gross some people out. Okay, I was very grossed out whenever I was researching this. Okay, but I'm just going to be showing you the very G-rated version of all of these types of pictures. Okay, when it comes to genetic mutations, anything is possible. Everything has happened. Everything can occur, as I'll show you towards the end, that the human body is capable of changing itself into almost any shape or form. Now, the green skin, right? Of course, we have the legend of the green children of Woolpit, these foreign children that wandered out of the forest and were found to have green tint to their skin, speaking some foreign languages. We also have, you know, descriptions through myths and legends and whatnot of different colors of individuals, not just white or black or yellow, but green people. And along with green people, blue people as well, as like I'll show you. Now, here's another medical condition, which is a mutation, where basically calluses and warts and things that are similar to those things, they build up, and they can build up in particular regions. This is an example where they build up on the back of the individual, exactly like how we would expect to see with the Kappa, which is also just a version of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which are, there's truth to that story as well, right? So these are not turtles that became human or whatever. They're human that devolved or appeared to us to devolve into some sort of animal figure or something that looks more animal-like or monstrous to us, right? This is an example of how the skull can actually mutate so that it sticks out and it protrudes, like the upper area that hold the upper teeth and the lower teeth in the jaw. It can actually stick way out. It can be an extreme underbite, an extreme overbite, or both at the same time, which causes this part of the mouth to actually come out, right? When your profile looking at the mouth, it comes way out. Here's an example of the blue family of Kentucky lore, right? There was actually a whole family of blue people. Now, if you think about this, I talked about the color spectrum shift that our world goes through many times, right? Right now, we have all of the colors, basically. But going further back in time, the sky itself was more golden during the Golden Age, or more of an amber or an orange color, or even further back, a red color, right? So you have to take into account the mixing of the colors of light and the new colors that will be produced by this. So, for example, if you have an orange-colored sky or a yellow Golden Age light that is radiating and bouncing off of blue people, yellow and blue make green, right? So they would look green. Here's an actual a guy whose skin turned blue. It's reminiscent of the Avatar people, many different blue gods and goddesses and whatnot in the movies and in history. Then we'll go over to the Cyclops. Okay, the Cyclops is not just a legendary monster, but an entire race, an entire tribe of humans that had only one eye right in the middle. Sometimes they're depicted as, you know, their eyes are closed over and they grew a third eye right here and that one's open or whatnot. Here are some depictions. I'll show you these ones. Notice how all of these, many times they depict these legendary tribe members as being very hairy. You see that one? That's like more of the Blemmyes with the head and the chest right there, very hairy. Here's the dog-headed tribe, very hairy. We've got the Cyclops right there in the middle, hair all over the body. And I have an entire chapter dedicated to this overabundance of hair and a couple of these tribes in my new book, which is Return to Hyperborea. Ancient Oblivion, Return to Hyperborea. Now, here is how they're commonly portrayed. When people first come across this, oftentimes they're researching the Middle Ages or the medieval times. Jim Donovan, hey, with the super chat. Thank you. Happy holidays, Jim Donovan. So people see pictures like this, right? We've got some guy that's laying on his back with a gigantic foot over his head. Those are the monopods. Here we have the cyclopses, people that only have one eye right in the middle, people that are born with two heads. Now this one, we actually have seen this in the news, so we're slightly familiar with this concept. Although when this happens, and it does happen frequently here in our world, it's oftentimes not really put in the spotlight. Then we have the people whose heads are in their chest, and then we have the dog-headed tribe as well. This is what they're commonly depicted as. Let's take a look at Cyclops. This is a medical condition called cyclopia, and it comes from genetic mutation. All of these things come from mutations within the body. These are real mutants, and it's not just one Cyclops that lived. And it doesn't just happen to humans, to people. I don't want to show you pictures of actual humans with cyclopia because it's very disturbing, okay? There's plenty of them on Google. You can check it out for yourself. But I can show you animals. So here's a drawing of an animal. Looks like a pig of some sort that has cyclopia. One other thing that you'll notice for those born with cyclopia, and I will also say this too, let's think about, since we are speculating on, you know, legendary tribes of mutant humanoids existing and living, keep in mind, there is a reason why this happened in ancient times. And I believe that it has everything to do with the conditions of their earth and their atmosphere were different to allow these types of mutations to exist without things like instant death, you know, as you would commonly get during this time. If a baby is born with cyclopia, they usually don't even survive, you know, a matter of days or whatever. Also consider in hospitals these days, whenever children are born with extreme deformities, oftentimes they will terminate, you know, its life basically or whatever. But the conditions back then were much different, which allowed for cellular regeneration and healthier living and longer living and whatnot. So when you have these mutations, they can live under different conditions much longer and actually be healthy. Now up here you'll notice what's called the proboscis. The proboscis. In those creatures, even humans, with cyclopia, there's often some sort of appendage that grows just above the eye. It sticks right out of the head. Sometimes it looks like an elephant's trunk. And there's actual real medical pictures of this online. Here's a drawing of one where you can see an example where you would have a person who's born, one eye right in the middle, and then this proboscis deal that sticks out right there. Now this turns into our modern Cyclops depiction of the one-eyed, you know, creature that has a horn that sticks right out of the middle of its face. But it's a real, actual medical condition. Now, next up here is we're going to look at the dogmen, the dog-headed tribe. Like I said, take a look at how the mouth protrudes and it sticks far out of the face. They're very hairy all over as well. We have got an example here. It says, who are the mysterious dog-headed men? I have an entire video dedicated to only the dog-headed men, the dog-headed tribe. It's on my Ancient Oblivion playlist. Feel free to check that out, and I'll go into great detail discussing the dog-headed men. Now, when researching some of the medieval chronicles, these images, pamphlets, pictures, bestiaries, and historic records that have depictions quite often as well, you won't notice this in more recent times, but back then they liked to combine imagery with writing, which is more of a balanced approach. But you can see here that there's like somebody that's going to cut this guy with a sword. Nobody's really paying attention to what's going on. These guys are looking at these animal people that are over here. But look what the animal people are concerned about. You see these animal people, right? They're standing upright. This guy's wearing a robe, right? This suggests that they are humans who mutated, right? That changed. And their form has been put through a perception filter of the individuals or communities that first saw them or spoke of them. And it's turned into gossip in writing, which is a cartoonification of ancient history. These animal humans are worried about and seem to be in great reverence of this flame that is descending from what I call the apex dome, or the inverted dome that is up there in the heavens, surrounded by this cloud or this mist. You have the fire of the heavens, heavenly fire that is descending down, that these people or animals or beings are greatly, in fear of. Everyone else is checking them out. Their eyes are over here. These guys are looking over here. He's not even worried about whatever's happening over here. But that's because this is what causes this. These animals and whatnot recognize the power that exists within this plasma, which is what it is. This is heavenly, quote unquote, cosmic plasma, cosmic rays and radiation that comes down from the heavens whenever the firmament opens up. It cracks open, it blows open as the atmosphere depressurizes during the neutral point of a polarity shift that our world goes through. Windows open up in the heavens. The sky splits apart, and all of that ionized hydrogen that is twisting and rushing around and spinning around, basically a magnetron or a cyclotron or a, what do you call that? What do you call that whenever you can send electricity through like super cold object and it like there's no resistance? I don't know. Anyways, that's the dome, basically. It's the firmament above us. And all that plasma comes in, okay? Because there is no magnetic force that is keeping it out or holding it out. So that plasma descends. All these cosmic rays and cosmic radiation and debris, they come in and they cause genetic mutations to particular regions of this world, right? Especially those regions where they're most abundant. This is a dog-headed tribal member that has been memorialized by the Catholic Church. This is, I think his name is Saint Christopher. He's the dog-headed saint, and he was known historically. This is in canon, in Catholic canon, that he had a dog's head. He was a gigantic humanoid, very strong, according to the legends, and he had the face of what people thought was a dog, with this protruding jaw and hair all over him, right? Saint Christopher in the Bible, Saint Christopher all throughout Catholicism, and he was not seen as an evil creature or being. Just because we encounter those humans that seem monstrous at first, or terrifying, or scary, doesn't mean that they all were. There's always anomalies and exceptions. Sometimes, they were cannibalistic, as many of the dog-headed tribe members were said to be, and sometimes they gave up eating humans, and they changed their course and their path in life. This is how they're commonly depicted today. This is a great example of what I call cartoonification. They're called the cynocephaly, or the dog-headed people, right? But they actually, over time, they would stick the head of a dog instead of looking at a human that was very hairy all over and maybe had a protruding jaw or something, or longer ears because they lived much longer, and a longer nose because they lived much longer. They cartoonified it over time as the first-hand accounts turned into second-hand accounts, and those turned into story form, and that turned into myth and into legend. And then pretty soon people, they forgot the origin of these stories, and they would just stick an actual dog's head and dog feet, onto the actual human of a real body, or onto the real body of an actual human. So this is one of the early concepts of the Wolfman, right? Or werewolves, you can say, right? Lycanthropy. Those who have lycanthropy, or the lichen tribe, they look more like this. This is why the original Wolfman looked like this. Instead of actually looking more like a dog, he looked more like a man that was doggish looking, right? And this is a real medical condition. This really does happen to human beings the world across. It's happening right now. It's just that they don't put it onto the news. They don't highlight and spotlight these things because, you know, people might start making a connection between fantasy and myths and fiction and science fiction and reality. The reality where these things stem from, where they come from. There's nothing new under the sun. This is a condition called hypertrichosis. And basically, it's also known as Wolfman syndrome. Right? Here's another medieval drawing of somebody with hypertrichosis hundreds of years back. This guy went and spoke with and had relations with the nobles. Oftentimes, these mutants, because of where they were from, they were able to act as representatives to those tribes and nations, so they were held in high regard. They were brought into the castles, and they were brought as speakers and representatives of entire nations of mutant tribes of human beings. Now, those with hypertrichosis and, you know, other genetic defects, they may grow an abundance of hair all over the body, so much so on their face, all over their bodies, that they would not need necessarily clothing. Okay, but they could put on clothing to, you know, maybe fit in whenever they go into town and they speak with the royals and act as ambassadors or representatives to their mutant tribe that they're a part of. This is a real drawing of ancient people that looked like this. Okay, as you can see, it's no stretch of the imagination to see where our fiction and fantasy come from in things like The Wizard of Oz, where this is a depiction of, or this is where the Cowardly Lion comes from. This is why the Cowardly Lion is not an actual lion on all fours, but he's a humanoid that has mutated, essentially. Here's another example of someone from yesteryear that had hypertrichosis. This particular individual made his living working at freak shows and circus sideshows and things like that, which oftentimes those mutants, all right, that's the job they ended up getting. Whenever the conditions in this world changed and the energy started to deplete and be pulled into the bowels of the earth, and it wasn't so much on the surface, then you had less and less and less of these genetic defects or enhancements, however you'd like to see it. Okay, but it was less mutants walking around and being born. So the tribes, the you know, is passed through family to family, right? And they would basically get jobs, whatever jobs they could. Oftentimes that meant they were in a sideshow of some sort of circus entertainment. They would perform for royals or be a part of the royal court. This guy was actually called Jojo, the dog-faced boy, right? That's because this is what the dog-faced people looked like in essence. Okay, you can get a good strong feel for it. Now, next up, we're going to check out the Panotii. These are people that have extremely long ears. Now, it's not just long ears, but large ears. Their ears were said to be so large that they could actually drape them over their shoulders and keep warm and cover themselves with their ears. The ears are one of the parts of the body that does not stop growing. And there are, you know, electromagnetic factors and radioactive factors that can disrupt how the body and how the stem cells particularly are producing to have them focus on particular parts of the body. Now, another thing that I'll point out is that this is during a time, if the atmosphere was electrically amplified, electromagnetically amplified, and radioactive to certain degrees, as I suppose it was, right? That means that the skin on human bodies, the world across, was constantly being exposed to an electrical current, an ambient electrical current, a very strong one. We are now, but it's a very weak electrical current. A stronger electrical current would stimulate collagen and elastin within your skin to allow it to be able to stretch to extreme lengths and whatnot. Here they are again with the extremely long ears draped around their bodies. This isn't just a rumor. This is real. This happens in the modern world, not so much to humans these days, just as the rest of these things don't so much happen to humans these days. Here's an example of the long ears right there. But it does happen in other parts of our world, especially in the animal kingdom, right? We have goats. Examples of here's one goat where the ear just goes really long. That ear could definitely cover that goat's entire body, right? If it can happen to animals, if it does happen to animals, it can also happen to human beings, right? The human body is an amazing tool. It's an amazing vessel, and it can do anything. It has a lot of potential. Okay, and it goes through changes from epic to epic. Now, this is an example of somebody that was said to have had the longest nose in history. His nose was 7.88 inches long. 7.8 inches long, and that's a real. I mean, these are mannequins, but these are examples of a real person who happened to live during the 18th century. Right, the 1800s, 1700s. That was a time when I believe there was way more electrical radiation in the atmosphere, and we had way more disturbances in the atmosphere. Now, let's get to these guys. These people are monopods, meaning 1 foot, one-footed, usually a very large foot. It's said that they would lay on their back, and their foot would be up, protecting them from the rays of the sun like an umbrella or a parasol. Here's another example of them on the far left over there. Right? And the people who saw them, I assume that they assumed that they were just, trying to stay out of the sun or whatnot, right? But in reality, what if this is somebody that has a genetic defect? This is a mutant, somebody who's mutated, and their legs, their 2 legs, are fused together into 1 leg. And this feels good for them. This is a comfortable position for them to be in because of their genetic defect. So they would lie down and swing their leg up over their head like that. And to others who didn't have that, they didn't understand that this was a comfortable position. They just said, oh, they must be protecting themselves from the rays of the sun or whatnot, right? This is also seen in architecture, in buildings and stuff. These are recorded actual humans that did exist, not one-off examples, but entire tribes, noteworthy to, be etched and recorded into our very buildings. Now, here is an example of an X-ray of somebody in the modern world of today that has this condition. This is called, affectionately, mermaid syndrome, right? This is whenever the 2 legs are fused into 1. As you can see by this drawing right here, this is a medical condition that does exist today, where the 2 legs fuse into 1, oftentimes the 2 feet down below also fusing into 1, giving it a sort of dorsal tail, or what do you call that? Like a fin, just like you would see with a mermaid, right? Here's an example of one. You have a Blemmyes over here that we'll get to, who is shooting his arrow at this guy who is one of the monopods. But look how his feet are drawn, right? You can imagine that if you suffered from this genetic mutation where your legs were fused together, I imagine that you would be more comfortable in the water, moving around and swimming, using your arms and your foot, to get around. It'd be much easier. It'd be like second nature instead of being on the land where the only comfortable position is lying on your back. You see what I'm saying? So this is likely the origin of things like mermaids, where people saw humans that had a fishtail in the water swimming around in groups or whatever. Here's another example. Here's a guy. Here's one of the monopods standing up this time, right? And you can see it's sort of legs, its little dorsal legs or whatever. It's 1 leg there. But it's right next to a guy who has multiple legs. This also happens in our world today. People are born with multiple appendages and limbs. It is a mutation. And if the conditions in this world change enough to affect our genes by a particular event the world across, then many people will have their dormant genes and DNA and junk DNA and whatever activated or rearranged at the very least. Here's another example of these monstrous tribes, of these legendary tribes of mutants. The backwards-legged people. Now, their legs seemed to others to be backwards. And even crazier, they were known to be very fast runners. Even though their legs were backwards, they were known to be able to run very fast. Sometimes they were called bodymon, antipodes, etc., and so on and so forth. Their legs were backwards. So is this a medical condition? Is this an actual genetic mutation? It is. This is hyperextension of the knees, right? You can combine various medical conditions or mutations to get these exact forms that we see drawn in ancient times, right? There was a very famous example in modern times of a girl who was known as the camel girl, because her hyperextension of her knees was so extreme that she could bend her legs all the way backwards. And oftentimes she would, get paid by sideshows and whatnot to take pictures, and people would come to see her or whatever. She could move around just like this without any problems. It wasn't painful or anything. She could stand up as well. Okay, she could also stand up. Now let's take a look. Wait, do I have her standing up? Yes, I do. All right, so check this out. I want to show you her standing up, and I want you to think about how this condition could help people to be very good jumpers. You see that leg? Damn, hold on, I gotta scooch that picture over a bit. But look at these legs. Check these legs out. You see that? This is like the legs of like a grasshopper or something. This is one of the reasons that they can jump so very far. Now, also take into consideration, the atmosphere was much different. Buoyancy was increased back then, immediately after the atmosphere depressurized. Objects were less dense and whatnot. So if this woman jumped with legs like that, it's very possible I could see her being able to jump ridiculous distances very far, right? Legs like a grasshopper. Very interesting. But she could walk around normal, right? But she had backwards legs, basically. Now, the Blemmyes, I believe, are next. So here's a cartoon drawing of a Blemmyes. They've been sort of, they become more monstrous over time due to our misunderstandings and, quite honestly, our shortcuts that we take when sharing these stories or these drawings or whatever. They get more and more ridiculous as time goes forward. So this is what they originally looked like, the Blemmyes, or some ancient depictions. This is from a map. Oftentimes they would put the pictures of these mutant tribes on the map to let travelers know that's where the tribe, that's where the whole community of people who are mutated in this particular fashion, that's where they would live. That's where they're from. Now, here's another picture. The Blemmyes' favorite weapon seemed to be the bow. Okay, you'll see them traveling around with bows quite often. They had pets also. They lived in entire communities and villages, as you can see just by this one picture alone, where there's many of them talking to each other, right? And also, I want you to notice that there's hair. So, originally, they were said to have their heads in their chest, okay? Over time, this turned into they had no head. They just had facial features on their chest, which turned into the mouth getting lower and lower until it's in the stomach, just like the cartoonified version that you saw. Sometimes they say their eyes are in their shoulders. But why do they have hair? Just like in this picture, you see this one right over here has hair, right? That implies he has a head, okay? So I'm going to show you how this is really possible. Here's some more depictions of them. Very hairy, as you can see. Larger heads. Wait a minute. Now take a look at this one. Okay, this one over here is going to get more into the medical condition of it. You see how this one over here is depicted? It all depends on what angle you're looking at these creatures from. Oftentimes when we look at these pictures, it's just two-dimensional. We get one angle right there. But if we were to flip these characters around and these anomalies around, you'd see that this guy has a big old hump on his back. Well, let's continue on with that thought. Here's another example of the Blemmyes on maps talking to one another. Here's some Blemmyes actually going to war against some other people over here. Here's another Asian depiction of the Blemmyes. Here you can see it's an entire head, but the head is just much lower on the body, almost just resting in what appears to be the chest. This is, I believe, a mutation, a medical condition that's simply known as the hunchback, or having a hunchback, right? It is a curvature of the spine. Here's that earlier picture of the Blemmyes that's shooting the monopod. Take a look at how the Blemmyes is drawn in this particular example. The shoulders go way up high, and the head is sunk down low into the chest. If we were to turn this figure sideways, I'll bet you'd see a big fat hump on his back. You see what I'm saying? These are humpbacks, the hunchbacked people that look like they had their head in their shoulders, or their head is in the middle of their chest, essentially. So let's take another look. Here's some more examples of people that, have this. You may know somebody in your family that has this condition or whatnot, but for them, it's comfortable to bend way over, right? To actually go back to that position, to try to stand up and go against the grain and fight that, it hurts. It's not comfortable. So oftentimes it would get worse and worse and worse, and the body would learn this is what is good. This is what is comfortable. So, the children could be born like this too. Now, In pop culture, the Arthropophagus is sometimes depicted as a being without a head, but instead they have their faces on the torso. This may be a misinterpretation based on Shakespeare's writings in Othello, where the anthropophagy, which is a Blemmie, it's a headless person, are mistaken to be described by the immediate following line, and it quotes Shakespeare. And men whose heads do grow beneath their shoulders. This is how they were originally described. Heads growing beneath the shoulders. And over time, that turns into the head. They don't have any heads. They just are headless people. Now, where does the word Blemmie come from? Well, the word Blemmie is blemme. Sometimes the word ya is attached to the end of blemme. Okay, so blemmia or blemmie. It's just the word Yah, which is Enki or Yahweh, some people would say, at the end, which is a suffix of this word Blemmie. So what is a Blemmie or a blem? It comes from, and sounds just like the word blemish. Some of you probably already made that connection, but it's related to Old Norse bladra. Bladra. Let me make this a little larger so you can see what's going on here. Related to Old Norse bladra. This word bladra is bladder. It is skin that is full of liquid. That's exactly what this means, Blemmie, okay? Blemme, pronunciation, Blemmie, same thing. And it essentially means a blister. It is a blistering, or when the skin grows into a blemish that is full of liquid or fluid. Here is an example, a small example on the skin in the form of like a wart or a blemish of some sort, right? This is a Blemmie. These are the people who had blemishes that were given to them by Yah or Enki or Yahweh. They were marked by God with these blemishes on their backs. They became hunchbacked, right? They also had horses, animals, and whatnot, just like you can see here. And sometimes they were shown riding, not often, but sometimes they were shown riding on top of different animals. Here's them on maps. This shows many different legendary tribes on this particular map. This one is more of the cartoonified version, like something out of Looney Tunes. This one shows the head sunk down altogether into the chest, right there, right? Here's another depiction. You can see sometimes they're more... Sometimes they're more on point. You see, this is clearly a hunchback where the head is sunk down much lower, right? That's the reason why they have hair on their heads, because they do have heads. They're just hunchbacked. Here's some images of different depictions of Blemmies. This one is of particular interest because they can ride and did ride animals like horses or goats or whatever it may have been. They also kind of look like Humpty Dumpty, you know, looking in the images as they're drawn, right? Now, you can imagine if you saw one of these riding a horse coming at you or somebody leaving, they would look like a headless horseman, wouldn't they? Right? Sometimes they have their hands tucked in or under. This guy's got a hand right here, I hope. That's a hand. And he's all bent over and stuff. This is another example of a Blemmie. It's just drawn weird. So people look at these ancient drawings from medieval times and they're like, what the hell? What is that, right? What is this supposed to represent? What does this symbolize? It doesn't symbolize anything. They're drawing what they saw. They're drawing what they encountered the best that they can, okay? Here's different versions of it. Same thing. This is a Blemmie as well, okay? It's just hunched over, okay? I don't know what's happening in the picture. It's pretty weird. And then sometimes it was extremely cartoonified, just sticking a head on top of a couple of feet. Same thing. These are the blemished ones. The ones with the blemishes. Now, here's different examples of different deformities, different mutations that have existed. This one right here, actually, if you watch the Fantastic Four movie, you know, they're superhero movies, right? Fantastic Four is one of them. Mr. Fantastic, who has very stretchy skin, does this exact same posture with his jaw. He like holds his jaw out or whatever. That's another thing too, is taking into consideration things that are mutations. Sometimes mutations are beneficial. Sometimes they're actually helpful. Sometimes they're not at all, and they just make life terrible for people, right? And also, off the top of my head, I wanted to go back and go back to the Kappa, because I forgot to mention something. Remember that Ninja Turtle looking one we first started with that had like the bowl, the indentation on its head? Well, the reason it had water in there, and the legends say if you knock the water out, that it would become docile is because they have a cranium, they have a malformed cranium or brain skull, basically, right? Which is affecting their brain and their sense of balance and their other the other sensors, basically. So if they are jostled and the water spills out of their head or whatever, I feel it's highly likely that they could experience vertigo or something where they become very dizzy and they need to like orient themselves. They're not going to try to fight or anything. And that's the reality to like spilling the water out of the top of their heads or whatnot, right? All of these are real. All of these come from reality. They're just cartoonified versions, and it's hard for us to say, oh, that's not real. That's a person with the dog head or whatever. But if you realize it's just an exaggeration of something that is real, then you can see how it's possible. All of the time, we have all these depictions of all these mythic, legendary tribes of mutated humans, the world across, right? So we've got like the Panotii, the big-eared people, look like they have Dumbo ears. We've got people with horns, quite often, the satyrs, the people that actually grew horns out of their heads. This is another thing I talk about when I talk about various stages of puberty, alternate stages, more stages of puberty. As you live past 100, under conditions that allow your skin to regenerate, and it's basically the fountain of youth affecting the whole world, people start to grow tails, horns, and other probably more sets of teeth, or maybe less teeth if they didn't need to eat and they were energetically charged. Here's another thing that you'll notice in many of these pictures too, is some sort of mountain that has what looks like plasma snakes rising up out of it, right? These are what I call plasma volcanoes. These are areas of intense electromagnetism. And this is the areas where you will quite often find these tribes of wild men, hairy people, giants and whatnot, mutants, and so on and so forth. That's because this is where these people lived, was near these objects, right? Or closer to the septentrionalis, which is the Arctic Circle, essentially, where all of that cosmic plasma and radiation and gamma rays and stuff, they come down out of there, and they come straight down into our world. So certain regions, especially the ends of the earth, were said to be inhabited by mutants. Go figure, right? People born with many different appendages, arms, many legs. This brings to mind, the various gods of Hinduism with their many arms and many legs. Split heads and whatnot. People are still born like this in these days, right? We've got many different examples of all of these legendary tribes of mutants. In my book, in my newest book, I go into specific detail about the dog-headed men, aka those with hypertrichosis or the very hairy people, on one side, because of a certain energy that is emitted by the earth acting as a battery, versus those who are on the other side, which is more of the Amazonians and the beautiful ones. This is the beautiful gods versus the ugly gods, the werewolves versus the vampires. Now, this is a particular interest of me as well, because like we saw earlier, we've got the mutants down below, but then we have atmospheric phenomena above. There's a relationship between the two. Do you see that? This is the exact same fire from the heavens, which there's also water pouring out of it as well, which is indicative of what type of plasma this is. This exact same picture we saw earlier with those animal people that were terrified of this heavenly plasma that was coming down out of the doom shape or the apex dome up in the heavens. This is what causes this down here. It's very simple. That's why they're right next to each other. These were featured in many different books and pamphlets and things across time. This used to be common knowledge that these people existed. They were more discussed, more talked about, right? Even if people didn't see them as much. There's also a lot of cannibalism that comes into play with these types of things as well. Here's a guy who's hunched over or whatnot. Here's a person that's eating a leg. And here's the dog-headed tribe eating a leg, right? Cannibalism was a bit more prolific back then, I guess you could say. It was still seen by us here in the Southlands, or those in the Southlands at the time, which is everywhere outside of the Arctic Circle. It was seen, as, not good, just like as it is today. But up in those regions, it was just common. That was just meat, and you could eat people or whatever. That's what they commonly would do. Now, they had discussions about that. They had their own forms of politics and stuff, whether or not it was right or wrong. to eat people. Let's see. I've already shared this picture, so we'll skip through past this one. Here's some more examples. I'm not by any means doing an extensive deep dive into every single mutation. Okay, for example, pygmies. We've discussed pygmies, the tiny people, time and time again, how they battled the cranes and the storks and whatnot. And this is the origin of the storks dropping off little people or babies being delivered. We've got the people who could only drink through a straw. Their mouths were mutated, so they only had a tiny little opening in their mouth. Sometimes the mouth can be mutated so that it's just a small little opening where you could barely put stuff into it. Sometimes it's a gigantically wide mouth. This is also a medical condition that's often fixed at a young age where they would, you have Joker face, basically, is what that is. The satyrs with their cloven feet and their horns that stick out of their head. The dog face tribe, once more. Cyclops, the Blemmyes. People with, exaggerated or really long lips or ears or whatnot. Now, modern academics will point something out, and they'll try to correlate this to tribal people. Tribal people do this to replicate the god race or the god people or the mighty ones or whatever. Remember, the closer you live to the North Pole, the longer you live. These people may have been radioactively mutated, but they lived very long lives. Right? So they were held in high regard just because they had really long lives. They were eternals. So tribal people that they met whenever they descended southwards would be amazed at them. They would copy them. They would do these various things like, stretching their lips or their ears or whatever, right? But it comes from something that happens naturally. Now here's an example of like the cloven feet. You can see that sometimes these creatures, these humanoids, have cloven feet. Right? This makes its way into our pop culture, our fantasy, and our movies. Quite often, things like the X-Men, superhero movies, and whatnot. And these superheroes oftentimes acquire their powers from, not always, there's always exceptions, but oftentimes from things like radiation. Okay, radiation from some sort of special rock, or oftentimes cosmic radiation from the heavens, electromagnetic radiation, etc., and so on and so forth. Here's an example, a real-life human being that has tree hands. All right, he has since gone through surgery. The government paid for him to have all of those removed from his hands, but he has these growths upon his body, not just his hands, but his feet as well, that make him have tree hands, just like Groot. Right, the tree people, the Ent, and so on and so forth. This is a condition where people's skin will start to grow out of control, like a cancer or something. Right. Here's another example of a tree person, basically. Right, people whose skin, they have a skin condition. These are their fingers. These are their hands. Okay, and this happens, as you can see. It can go on up onto the face. This can cover the entire body until you look, like a version of this, and people are trying to prune themselves and shave it down and, whatever, however they took care of that in the ancient world. Sometimes it can look like rock instead of, tree bark or something on the hands or the feet or the rest of the body, which gives you the thing. These are all of our stories, especially comic books. They come from real history that I call ancient oblivion that we have collectively forgot about. But that memory still floats around within our collective subconscious. We still know these things innately. We still have this memory etched into our collective subconscious memory. We know that there is a reality to the fiction, that the fiction stems from fact, that it comes from actual real historic accounts and stories. People that had tails, people that had horns, still have tails, still have horns. Oftentimes they're depicted as having cloven hands or cloven feet, human beings. Now sometimes that cloven syndrome, people heard cloven or split and feet, and they would put like, a goat feet on the picture. They would cartoonify it and turn it into actual goat feet with hooves and stuff. But in reality, it's a genetic mutation. It's a genetic mutation that happens in mass sometimes, the world across, creating entire tribes of people that have split hands called cloven hands. Their hands are cleaved or split or cut, or their feet as well. Sometimes they would be a different color. Sometimes they would appear to have superhuman strength. right? Or powers or abilities. This is the cleft hand, okay? So you can imagine many of these people would only look like they have 3 fingers or 3 toes or whatever, just like you saw in the Nightcrawler and the Ninja Turtles and all that. Sometimes people had these growths in different places on their body, which gave rise and inspired much of what we call fiction and sci-fi and fantasy. When we think about these alien races, they're not really alien for the most part. They're actually terrestrial, forgotten, mutant, legendary tribes of humans that did exist. So, one thing that can account for this are stem cells. Stem cells are a portion of your genetics that are able to recreate or create any other cell in the body. What does that mean? That means that any place in your body, a stem cell can change it into a tooth, or a nail, or a horn, or an eye, or whatever, right? What are stem cells? Stem cells are special cells that have the unique ability to transform into different types of cells in the body. With stem cells, your stem cells can command your other cells to change into, you could have a hand growing out of your face, or, there's no limit to the imagination. These cells are found in different parts of the body, such as bone marrow and umbilical cord. They are very important because they can help in the regeneration, there's that word, and repair of damaged tissues. They're also used in medical treatments for diseases such as cancer and disorders and whatnot. This is your mutant tribe. These are the X-Men that lived around a country, a nation, an island that is now a phantom island on many of our maps that's in the shape of a circle with an X right in the middle of it. Oftentimes, these mutants, whenever they're discussed within fiction, they talk about having the X gene, the special mutant gene that lays dormant within people. And then every once in a while, because of certain circumstances or certain times that we're going through, this X gene is activated and it turns on. And the body starts to mutate into incredible shapes and different abilities that come with these, right? Sometimes it is the gamma rays. The comic books will come right out and tell you it's gamma radiation, oftentimes, right? What is gamma radiation? So right here behind me, you see, like, for example, radio waves, very long, very stretchy, very far. But as you go into microwaves, infrared, the visible light spectrum, these waves, they get shorter and shorter and shorter, just like 5G versus 4G and 3G and whatnot. It's all, it's all more shorter distances and more powerful bursts of energy until you get to gamma radiation. It says a gamma ray is the type of electromagnetic radiation with the highest energy and the shortest wavelength. That's good because it means it can't travel that far. You have to be pretty close to it for it to have a serious effect on you. But that all depends on, how far away you think that's, close is or whatever. Okay, this is an example of radiation. This one right here is called synchrotron radiation, also, very closely related to cyclotron radiation. All this means, in simple layman's terms, is that if you have a beam of energy or plasma that's shooting in one direction, it's also spinning. It's also creating a vortex as it goes. And the faster it spins and the faster it travels, or the more extreme angle it turns at or slows down at, it will throw off energy. And I'm just giving you the layman's terms for this type of radiation. But it throws off particles. These are alpha particles and beta particles, and also gamma rays. So if you imagine a black hole, this is how a black hole is actually depicted within certain sciences. This is also our dome, which has an opening in the middle of it, which is the apex dome underneath. Whenever our dome, acting as the quote-unquote traditional black hole, when it opens up, all that ionized hydrogen that is spinning around and spiraling around the firmament, which the light passes through and gives us the sun and the moon and the stars and stuff. But whenever the actual plasma portion is allowed to come into this world, during the depressurization, when the sky opens up, all that plasma goes down into the quote-unquote black hole, where it is sped up, right? It's going really fast, and it's spinning around, and then it comes back into our world, entering into our atmosphere, bringing along high amounts of radiation with it because of that spin, or going into the black hole. These are Birkeland currents. This is how plasma moves. This is how, that radiation would come about whenever these electromagnetic currents move around. They always spiral. They always create vortices. They spin, just like when you watch Ghostbusters and the proton pack shoots that beam of plasma or protons or whatever. You notice that there's electricity spiraling around those beams. These are Birkeland currents and Z-pinches and whatnot. Now, whenever people watched this, snakes, essentially, plasma serpents, wonderful fiery serpents and seraphim and whatnot, dragons, descending out of this depressurization point high up in the atmosphere from this inverted dome in the sky, which looks like an eyeball or a shield. They saw what looked like snakes and whatnot that came into this world that could change life on this world. Changing the actual bonds, mutating things and objects, terraforming the world, and changing the inhabitants that live on this world. This was seen as the head, and only the head, of Medusa, with the snakes as hair wrapped all the way around. Right? These are the plasma snakes. She used to be beautiful when the firmament wasn't opened, but when the firmament opened up, her appearance altogether changed. And this is the X-Men, right? Always related to the apocalypse. This is actually a movie called X-Men Apocalypse. The mutants come from the apocalypse. See all this electromagnetics in the form of lightning and stuff up here in the sky behind him on the pyramids, right? This is exactly where these mutations come from. Blue skin, right? Hairy beasts and whatnot. People that have high sensitivity to electromagnetics or plasma. The Nightcrawler, the split cloven hoof and whatnot, increased in the auras of people. As you increase the aura or the electromagnetics of the surrounding atmosphere, you get a residual increasing of your very own spirit, your very own aura, your very own electromagnetic spectrum of your spirit body, right? Which allows you things like telepathy and stuff, how Professor X has, and so on and so forth. Now, just as a bonus, we're at the end of the presentation. What's up, Kim Love? Welcome to my channel. Just as a bonus, here's another example. So if you think about the character Mr. Fantastic, as I mentioned earlier, his special power is that he's stretchy. Some might see that as cool, maybe not cool, I don't know. But here's more examples of people that had extra stretchy power, you could call it, during the medieval times, right? There were these contortionists that you'll find all over these different images and stuff of people who are just bending their bodies to extreme degrees. Sometimes just circular, making a little loop or whatever. But this is indicative of them being more stretchy, which is also a condition that is I lost my words. It's a medical condition, okay? It is something that can happen to your skin. Some of you probably actually have this where you have very stretchy skin, or you can maybe bend your fingers back further than everyone else. Well, whenever your elastin is on high reproduction in your body because of the atmosphere being electrically charged, and it's producing more of this collagen and elastin, you'll be able to do things like this and bend your body and contort your body in all kinds of shapes and ways. This is passed down genetically from time to time because the genes remember these ancient times when whole entire nations of people could do this type of stuff, right? Bending over backwards. Now, this happens, right? I want to show you a map, okay? I reference this map quite often. The energy, this is the North Pole. This is the Mercator map of the Arctic, okay? So this is the center of the world from a top-down view looking at this plane of existence, right? So pretend we're looking from the firmament itself, the dome above, looking straight down into this world. This is what you would see, okay? Now, when the firmament opens up, this is what the plasma would see. All of those gamma rays and stuff, they're going to be focused in on this particular area. When they come into this world, they would be naturally spread out. They would also be repelled by a magnetic force right here in the middle in the form of a magnetic mountain or a lodestone mountain. This is Rupus nigra, the black rock. It's a magnetic mountain which would repel much of that plasma, right? So that plasma would come in, it would spread out, it would wrap around this island, and would have the greatest effect around what we now call the Arctic Circle, all the way around this island, which is represented by this, this red line. So anything that is within this red line, there was a good chance, if I'm correct, that those inhabitants would be living at the edges of the known world or at the edges of the earth, and that they would become legendary mutant tribes of human beings. Dog-headed, cannibalistic, hairy, wild people, strange people. Now in the Bible, in the book of Revelation, it talks about the New Jerusalem, which is this right here. This is the Garden of Eden. This is Hyperborea. There will be a new version that's created. And it compares the Southlands, which is all the way around, with the center place, with Hyperborea and with paradise. And it says this, Revelation 22:15, outside of paradise, outside are the dogs who practice magic arts, the sexually immoral, the murderers, the idolaters, and everyone who loves and practices falsehoods. So this is in reference, I believe, to many of these mutant and strange tribes from Amazonian women to the dogmen, from a vampire class of humanoid beings to giants, cyclopses, to the monopods, the Blemmyes, hunchbacks, headless tribes. By the hundreds and hundreds, they lived up here in the Arctic at the edges of the known world, not in paradise. Although you might find some examples here as well, especially as some of these tribes found paradise and they went there, right? Like the pygmies. But you find these examples up here. And then from time to time, those people would migrate. Not often. They would often stay on their islands. They would often stay home where they're used to being, okay? Which would oftentimes actually enhance their genetic conditions. But sometimes they would travel outwards, just like St. Christopher did. He lived on one of these islands nearby, probably Anode or Cathode Island to Hyperborea, and he ventured out as a dog, as a giant dog-headed cynocephaly with hypertrichosis. And he went out and he mingled amongst the people. And these people all had their own quote-unquote religion or perspective on the events that were happening celestially and terrestrially around them. They interpreted it. They came up with their own religions, belief systems, histories, and so on and so forth. And that is our presentation about real monstrous tribes of mutant nations. I believe we covered many of them. Feel free to add to this discussion in the comments section and, any examples or whatnot. But I feel this is very important because what once was will be again. This is going to come back around. People, humans, will mutate in mass one of these days as the conditions in our atmosphere and our world suddenly and drastically change as we get closer and closer to the plasma apocalypse. Until next time, I'm JayDreamerZ saying good vibes and goodbye.
But something's forcing me to stay. Ooh.